Opening the diagonal for the queen and bishop immediately establishes central influence. Centering the pawn creates immediate central influence and opens lines for development. Instantly contesting the center, this knight jump aims to unbalance black's pawn structure and prepare for rapid development. Developing the knight to its most active square, this solidifies the pawn and prepares for a flexible response to white's next intention. Instantly targeting black's central pawn, this bishop maneuver initiates an immediate tactical dialogue, potentially leading to pawn structure imbalances. Challenging the bishop's placement directly questions its future influence on the center and potentially offers space on the queen side. Maintaining the pin on the knight preserves pressure and hints at future queenside expansion. Launching a counterattack on the e4 pawn, this move immediately challenges white's central control and signals aggressive intent. Securing the king is paramount, preparing for the middle game's inevitable storm and freeing the rook. Consolidating the bishop's influence and preparing to castle, this develops a vital piece towards the center. Recapturing the central pawn is now the priority, preparing to launch an attack on the d-file. Solidifying the center and preparing to challenge the d4 square, this move quietly fortifies black's pawn structure. Sacrificing the bishop here aims to disrupt black's pawn structure, potentially creating weaknesses in the queenside pawn chain. Opening the b-file grants black dynamic counterplay, but the doubled pawns present a long-term structural weakness to manage. Opening the center establishes commanding influence and forces black to commit their structure. Reclaiming central space and preparing a knight maneuver to c5 or b6 solidifies black's position. Opening the d-file for the rook now creates immediate pressure and disrupts black's pawn structure. Reclaiming the center with the pawn, black repositions his structure for future king safety and midfield influence. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing for queenside expansion offers white excellent scope. Securing the monarch by tucking it away behind the pawn chain offers immediate safety. Repositioning the bishop here to potentially pressure black's queenside pawn structure after capturing on c6. Solidifying the center and preparing for a kingside pawn push, though it slightly weakens the light squares. Averting tactical traps, this maneuver redirects the queen to a more active central square, preparing for potential queenside expansion or swift central pawn advances. Shifting the king to the corner offers a sliver of safety, though the queenside remains somewhat exposed. Shifting the queen to c3 prepares to exploit the dark squares and potentially pressure the queenside pawn structure. Safeguarding the b7 square now offers the bishop a more active diagonal and bolsters the pawn chain's defense. Initiating the knight's repositioning to a more active central square, potentially eyeing the weakened c6 pawn or supporting a kingside initiative. Aggressively seizing the open file, black prepares for imminent confrontation along the b-file, aiming to exploit white's exposed queen. Asserting control over the central squares, this knight repositions to potentially exploit weaknesses in black's pawn structure. Relocating the bishop to the queenside rook file seeks to contest crucial central space. Solidifying the knight's presence on d2 supports future queenside expansion and potential central pawn advances, preparing for a more harmonious setup. Black seizes the a-file, creating immediate pressure on the queenside and disrupting white's knight outpost. Reclaiming the knight, white activates a fresh attacking piece, aiming to exploit black's potentially weakened queenside pawns. Commencing queenside development now aims to activate the queen and eye white's central pawns. Unleashing the queen's diagonal assault aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and control key squares. Targeting the weak c-pawn, nc5 aims to disrupt white's queenside pressure and potentially open lines for counterplay. White repositions the knight, aiming to secure control over key squares and prepare for a potential queenside expansion. Regaining the bishop's diagonal, the queen now eyes the weak kingside pawn structure, hinting at future tactical skirmishes. Shifting the queen to attack the c5 knight creates an immediate dilemma for black. Re-establishing the central presence of a knight offers a vital outpost for further skirmishes. Concentrating forces on the d-file solidifies white's control and prepares for potential central breakthroughs. Reclaiming the central squares is crucial now, preventing white from building an insurmountable pawn majority. Exchanging queens simplifies to an endgame where white's knight on c4 can become a powerful outpost. Reclaiming the rook solidifies the pawn structure and prepares for the queenside initiative. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, potentially aiming for d2 or g3 to support an e4 pawn push or control central squares. Shifting the king to g8 provides a vital safety net, clearing the f-file for potential action and anticipating any breakthrough tactics. Reinforcing the central pawn's defense, this knight repositions for potential kingside pressure. The king cautiously advances, seeking sanctuary from the open diagonals and eyeing central control. This redeploys the rook, eyeing the open c-file for potential pressure while also preparing for king safety maneuvers. Solidifying the pawn chain opens up the queenside for potential maneuvers. Fortifying the kingside pawn structure, this move prepares for potential central advances or a more active piece play. Reactivating the rook on the d-file, aiming for pawn breakthroughs and potentially a more active role in the endgame. Forcing the rook exchange simplifies the position dramatically, potentially leading to a more open endgame. Capturing the rook on d8 initiates the endgame, creating immediate imbalances with doubled pawns on black's queenside. Regaining control of the central file after the exchange signals an immediate intent to pressure black's isolated pawn. Reclaiming the central files after the exchange, black aims to consolidate their diminished pawn structure by reactivating the knight. The knight's foray to the edge of the board aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create endgame possibilities by centralizing its influence. Reclaiming space on the queenside is the immediate goal, preparing to challenge white's rook. Asserting central dominance, the knight hops into a powerful forward post, eyeing critical squares. Consolidating the rook's influence on the 7th rank now becomes the primary objective. Securing the king is paramount before launching further operations. This prepares for potential pawn advances or piece redeployments. Consolidating the monarch towards the center is a sensible step as the pawn structure simplifies. Solidifying the central pawn structure to gain space for bishop development and prepare for future kingside action. A bold attempt to crack open the kingside, but it weakens the dark squares and invites potential trouble. A strategic repositioning to prepare a central pawn push, aiming to activate the knight and potentially create queenside counterplay. Gaining breathing room on the kingside, preparing for potential pawn advances or a knight repositioning. Shifting the king offers a crucial refuge from potential threats on the open files. Seeking to expand space on the kingside, this pawn push prepares to potentially create queenside weaknesses or advance further. Centralizing the knight on a more active square, aiming to pressure black's weakened queenside pawns. Preparing to reroute the king towards the queenside will soon be crucial for activity, as the queens are gone. Reactivating the king's central presence prepares for potential pawn advances or defensive maneuvers. The king boldly ventures into the center, aiming to participate in the game's unfolding drama. Initiating pawn expansion on the kingside to open lines and create space for pieces. Opening the h-file offers black a chance to activate their rook and create counterplay against white's somewhat exposed king. Opening the h-file offers immediate dynamic chances, a stark contrast to the previous positional grind. The doubled pawns on the kingside are now a clear target, and your rooks need to find active squares to counter white's pressure. Solidifying the king's central presence aims to transition from a blocked position towards a more active middle game fight. Shifting the rook to f7 aims to improve its defensive posture while potentially preparing for future maneuvering on the kingside. Repositioning the rook to the 2nd rank prepares to contest the vital d-file and potentially create pressure on black's king. The rook retreats, a cautious regrouping to potentially reinforce the kingside advance. Repositioning the knight prepares for a potential kingside attack, aiming to exploit black's slightly exposed monarch. This rook retreat is a strategic repositioning, aiming to utilize the opened h-file for potential future action, even if it seems passive now. Shifting the knight to the kingside opens up potential threats and prepares to contest that crucial central file. The knight's relocation is a pivotal maneuver, aiming to finally penetrate the kingside defenses. Consolidating white's queenside presence, this pawn advance seeks to restrict black's bishop and prepare for potential expansion. King's safety remains a concern. Consider activating other pieces before committing the king further into potential complications. Probing for weaknesses on the queenside, white opens lines that might eventually create a passed pawn. Initiating a central pawn break, black aims to liberate their position and challenge white's queenside space advantage. A pawn's journey begins, aiming to anchor this side of the board and restrict black's mobile pieces. The king cautiously shifts, seeking refuge behind the advancing pawns, a prudent step in this drawn-out maneuvering. Securing the file opens avenues for rook activity, a crucial step in this simplified endgame. Sensing an opportunity, black aims to activate the rook and challenge white's central pawn structure. Initiating a queenside pawn push to disrupt black's structure and create new attacking avenues. Repositioning the bishop to a more active diagonal seeks to exploit weaknesses on the kingside. This repositions the knight to a more active square, threatening a fork while improving central influence. Repositioning the bishop to a less passive square aims to challenge white's control over the queenside and potentially open lines for black's rook. Seizing the open diagonal with the knight opens lines and eyes the weak pawns. Challenging white's pawn chain by opening the kingside is a bold gambit, seeking counterplay. Unleashing the knight to create immediate threats and disrupt black's defensive setup on the queenside. Embracing the open lines, black injects dynamism into the center and challenges white's pawn structure, aiming to seize the initiative. Opening the king's path creates a dynamic imbalance. Anticipate sharp tactical skirmishes. Activating the knight to pressure white's central pawns and challenge the open c-file. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, aiming to exploit the newly opened diagonal. Developing the bishop to a more active diagonal could finally stir this stagnant endgame. Repositioning the knight to d3 opens a clear path for it to potentially support a pawn advance or contest the central files. Activating the rook on the semi-open file offers better mobility, preparing to challenge white's central pawn advance. Repositioning the rook to the 7th rank immediately threatens the pawn and aims to disrupt black's defensive setup. Gaining control of that open file with the rook offers a significant positional advantage. Advancing the pawn creates dynamic space and forces black to confront a more open board. Recognizing the danger, black shifts the king to safety, away from the potent attacking potential of white's advanced pieces. Opening the c-file to activate the rook and create dynamic play. The bishop repositions to a new diagonal, seeking potential outposts and supporting a central pawn push. Opening a decisive path for the queen and rook to infiltrate the opponent's weakened kingside. Opening up the kingside pawn structure creates immediate attacking potential, but also leaves weaknesses. Targeting the weak pawns on the queenside, this knight repositions for a decisive breakthrough.